where we bring journalists, such journalists, and after a panel discussion, they are either arrested or killed immediately. So it's not an easy thing, and for that, but we are praying that will not happen. So then I want to start this discussion, obviously in no order. But colleagues, as I mentioned, let's go to the point. We have about 21 minutes. So let's just give, using the miniskirt theory, give what is required. Give people what they need to know, not necessarily what they want. So that then we make the conversation a bit short and focused. So I'll allow you without asking any specific, but I know, for example, she will share some of the experience as a journalist in exile. DK, who managed the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, has been very critical in helping us manage when journalists come or have arrived in the country and we have nothing to do with them. He runs for us. Emmanuel is from Rwanda. He will share his experience. Emmanuel, be free to share what you think is necessary so that we don't put you in trouble. But he's the CEO of the Rwanda Media Commission. So share what you think is relevant. There's no specific demand that we give. And then Lauren will share. Then Kenneth Wandera, because Kennedy also runs the East African, the Foreign Journalists Association of the President. So with that, use your own decisions, but make sure you use 5 minutes. But give us the information you think is relevant for this discussion. So I'll start with Kenneth. You deal with a lot of journalists, obviously, in the country and the region who go through a lot. You are called at night when they have been arrested or about to be thrown out of other countries. Please, what has been your experience?
Yeah, I think it's a big challenge because one thing is to flee to a host country and also getting an opportunity to practice journalism in that particular country, which is also quite challenging. But one thing that we've really documented and is a big issue of concern here is these people, sometimes their safety and security is not assured, even in the host countries, because if you, for instance, you are in Eritrea and you are reporting about a president who is not even thinking about transition of power or handing over power to someone else, and then you have to flee your country, come to, for instance, Nairobi, and then we have his surrogates walking all over trying to look for you. Sometimes it's a challenge because some of them, these guys are picked from here, and that's why I think you did good that their faces are not exposed because they are still under threat. And one of the things I think we need to do, other than now lamenting, we can document a hub that really, I think, can help them to get assured of their safety. But I don't see it as a roadblock. For that matter, if they can remain in the host countries and still practice journalism, we can assure them that environment in the host countries, how they can practice journalism. But again, the issues around psychosocial support, the legal counsel, and ensuring that there is that kind of collaboration with the journalists in their host countries, I think that will be very important because, like I said, it's one thing to flee your country because of threats and harassment into a host country, but it's also another thing for you to continue practicing your professional trade in a host country. So there's a lot that we can do, but I think we need to stand with our colleagues out here.
Thanks. But you have received such cases of journalists who are fleeing their countries?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Lauren, do we share your experience and largely what do we do?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Happy World Press Freedom Day to all of my colleagues. My name is Lauren Odilis Doro. I'm a managing editor of Radio Tamazuch. A small brief about the radio before I share my experience as an exiled journalist working away from home. Radio Tamazuch was established in 2011. It covers South Sudan, and border areas. In 2015, the war broke out in South Sudan in 2013, so it's become very hard to cover stories, especially accountability stories, human rights violation stories, killing of innocent civilians. So in 2015, our office was closed by national security, and then also they deported some of our international staff. So this is how we found ourselves in an exile, media away from home. And the step by then the government takes, it's for them, to silence us, not to cover such stories. Of course, being in exile media away from home, there is a lot of challenges. And I can list it, or I can put it in 3 groups. One is psychosocial problems or challenges. Second is digital challenges. Third is access to audience and sources. On psychosocial challenges, one of the challenges most of the exile media journalists face is fear of being kidnapped or killed by unknown gunmen. Secondly, also losing life back home. Imagine you are like based, for example, our case, we got our independence in 2011. We are happy to have our own country. So for you, coming back home, start establishing life, and then all of a sudden you have to leave everything behind. So it was, it's really a rough journey for journalists, and also isolation and integration challenges. For example, you are away from home in a new country. You don't know anyone. You have to start from zero. As for example, Sudanese and South Sudanese, we are raised, or our community is extended communities. So you find yourself, you are alone at your house. No one, you are not talking to anyone. No one can reach you. No one can talk to you. You also, starting, to mark your circle. Who is my friend? Who is not my friend? Who, if I talk to him, he can report me to the authorities. And also, you fear back home what will happen to your family. And also, limited financial support, cost of living. For example, most of Sudanese and South Sudanese, they have their houses, they have their home. And then now suddenly you are in a different country, you have to pay rent, you have to adapt. Maybe you have another businesses or another source of income. Back home, you can't access it. Secondly, on digital challenges, as a journalist, one of the challenges I've faced, or most of the exile media houses face, is website hacking. As also our website was hacked in 2016 when the war was serious in my country. And then it's also making it difficult to reach your audience. Secondly, online harassment. Most of the journalists faced online harassment, especially as female journalists. And there is a lot of cases, whether in Sudan or South Sudan, telephone line blocking. Sometimes here, because we do move in Africa, you'll wake up in the morning, you want to cover a story, your phone is blocked. At the end of the day, in Arabic we call it government wasla. Yeah. So it's one of the challenges in the newsroom. Receiving unknown emails and also online threatening messages. As I've mentioned earlier, the third challenge is, reaching audience and sources. Reaching target audience it's hard because they don't know you. Most of them, you don't have their contact. You can't reach them. Due, for example, to a lot of challenges, some of them even fear to talk to you or to even answer a phone, or once even they know you are from Tamazight, there is 1, 2, 3 going on any other media, in any other media house, there's 1, 2, 3 going on their area, they will fear. And also, challenges on verification and verification, or how to verify or fact-check information. It's become a challenge for the media houses because, for example, back in our countries, the reason we flee the country because there's censorship, there's no freedom of press. There's some institutions, even if you're within the country, for you even, to reach out and, take information from them, it is hard. And even if you can check the website, you'll see there is website there, but with zero information. So it's become, imagine if you're within the country, by then we used to face challenges. What about you being an exile media? High cost of international calls. You have to call back. You have to follow. So it's also a major challenge because, for example, there's some areas back, whether in our countries, there's no access of communication. So you have to use, for example, Sureya. For you to do an interview, like 10-minute interview, it costs 5,000 Kenya shilling for only 10-minute interview. So it's also one of the major challenges. Lastly, reaching out to the sources. Most of the challenges is, government even send circular to some institutions, to some government officials for them not to talk to you. So you feel isolated. Most of the sources, even before talking to you, giving you information, they also feel they are risking their life. Oh, time. I'm almost, yeah. I think that I'll stop here. Back to you.
Fine, thank you. Amen. Mnasikia wenyewe, sio? And you have not even added, once you go to a third country, you live as a refugee in a room, a small room. Sometimes once they arrive in Kenya, DK will tell you, you are arrested.
It's causing the worst humanitarian disaster on the planet. To give you an idea, there's 8 million Sudanese who've been displaced from their homes. We don't have the time to dive into too many details on that, but just let that sink in. About 8 million individuals being displaced, and a looming famine that's happening. That people are working towards. Even as journalists, as we're part of the Sudan Media Forum, where we're dedicating most of our time to shed light on the humanitarian crisis itself. When it comes to our profession, when it comes to journalism, the main problem right now inside of Sudan is that there's a huge void in the official media, whether it's broadcast, radio, print. Any one of these aspects are severely impacted. Most of the independent media has had to leave Sudan because of how intense the war is. And now that void has been filled by warmongering media. Social media influencers who are mobilizing along ethnic lines and along tribal lines. So the situation is pretty dire. And when you look at the map of Sudan and you start looking, okay, as a journalist, where would you go when war breaks out in Sudan? You start looking at the map and you start asking yourself as a journalist, can I conduct my job as a journalist safely? You look at Chad, Libya, Egypt, Eritrea, Ethiopia, South Sudan. Neither one of these countries where you can guarantee any relative safety for a journalist. These are places where you go as a journalist, you're already under some kind of surveillance. Kenya has become for us as Sudanese journalists, it's become one of the safe havens, one of the few safe havens in the region where we can go to just to be safe as a journalist. Now, there are some challenges, like my sister Lisa was saying, that there's, first of all, the legal question of when journalists come to Kenya. We've always tried to interact with some of our Kenyan colleagues and see what would be the pressure points to get some kind of legal presence for journalists in Kenya. Like my brother was saying, we have to go to Kakuma or Dadaab, register as a refugee, things like that. None of our journalists can afford the work permits and the fees that have been increasing recently. So that's one thing. Another problem for us in Sudan, South Sudan, they might be a little bit better on this, is the language barrier as well. So, when coming and trying to work with Kenyan journalists and work with Kenyan journalism bodies and try to get the knowledge that's been built up over here, we always look at the issue of fellowships and training as one of the major things that we need as Sudanese journalists to take advantage of the advanced media landscape that's here in Kenya. I mean, looking at the presentation from the brother chairman was very eye-opening. We wish we would have had this kind of research and this kind of room to operate inside of Sudan. But that's when it...
And that meant that they had to continue doing their job. But again, the big question for us was, how do you manage this? Because it seems to be something that the other side of Rwanda, which is Burundi, is saying that Rwanda is supporting ABCD, and we want to be careful enough not to ensure that the journalists who are here as refugees, again, they're doing work that is going to put the two states in conflict. So it becomes a tough situation for us, but all the same, we have the obligation to ensure that their safety is guaranteed. And I remember one of the organizations similar to the one that Eric heads, the Association of Journalists, took up the responsibility of helping them find comfort in working in Rwanda. Our duty now was how do we accredit them so that they can do their business. We didn't have any specific guidance in our codes, in our laws, how such a situation can be managed. So it was a tough situation for us, but at the end of the day, they had to live, and they lived a comfortable life. And that's the experience I can share from now.
Thank you. And Emmanuel, I know we have worked with Emmanuel a lot in terms of journalists in third countries, but we will not go into details. DK, you have worked in this area for quite some time. What do you encounter when journalists come from all those countries that I've mentioned? And as a person who works in that area, you manage safe houses, the legal, whatever. Give us in a summary, what do you do?
Yeah, thank you so much, Victor. My name is Kamau Ngugi. I run an organization called the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, popularly known as Defenders Coalition. As Victor mentioned, we have been involved in the safety protection issues of human rights defenders for quite some time, and we consider journalists as human rights defenders because they advance the right to information and other rights that are very critical in a democratic society. I also work because we are interconnected as an organization, we are interconnected with regional organizations that offer protection services for human rights defenders and journalists. We have, for example, the Eastern Horn of Africa Human Rights Defenders Network and the Pan-African Human Rights Defenders Network. Now, these are organizations that are available to offer services at two levels. So we have what we call the preventive aspect, and I know MCK has been leading a lot of work around training of journalists, safety, because if there is one sector that is really faced with challenges, but there is a lot of lack of awareness, is among journalists. Because of the work that you do, there is little effort that is put to put safety first. And I think that becomes a bigger challenge. That is why there is a lot of now investment going into safety training, so that at least you can have some basic things that you can do to prevent the occurrence or to mitigate risk when it comes. We had a survey when we were checking on journalists before they go to the field, what they never forget to carry. One, and a priority was a camera and a battery, and then there was a notebook and another notebook and a pen and another pen. None of them remembered to carry an extra sweater. No one remembered to think ahead to how to share a contact of where they are going to their beats. Now, what does that mean? If I compared that with other human rights defenders, one thing they always remember is if they have a phone, but they carry a list of must call numbers. They even have them off-head. They also have an extra sweater because at any time you can become either a guest of the state in the police station, or you can also become someone who will need to be evacuated urgently because of stepping on the toes of many people that you work with. I wanted to just divert a little bit to mention, because this is a very critical day, it's about the environment. I want to say that journalists that are working in the field of environment now have become, I think now, the topmost people who are seeking, number 2 topmost in the list of people who are seeking safety and protection from organization when they talk about environmental justice. The number 1 are, of course, journalists who are operating in a conflict situation, particularly in the Sudan. Recently it was Eritrea and Ethiopia, but now looks like they're being overtaken by the risk of reporting on the environment. Now, is that to scare people? No. I think what I'm simply saying is the people that are asking the right questions around this period and time, that it's not just about encouraging, talking about environment, it's not about encouraging people to plant trees, but it's also to question the narrative that exists, for example, that only governments, for example, can protect whole forests, in the case, for example, of Mao, and forget about the indigenous communities that have been living there and deriving livelihoods there for all these years. So we have, again, not questioning conversation around the new models of conservation in which particularly pastoralist communities' land are being leased out, and within no time, then communities, when there is, for example, drought, they look for a place to graze, and then they have no idea who signed and where are the contracts. Because, and I think this is something you need to challenge, and I know that will also come with risks, I am not aware of any training that is going on for people to value what is the so-called carbon credit. What is the value of credit? So that a community, when they lease their land, what are the expected benefits? What I've noticed now, journalists that are coming up trying to explain to the people how they need to be aware, the right to give consent, the right to know about the contracts and the returns, those are the ones that are faced with serious reprisals. Having said that, therefore, what I want to assure the people in the room that these networks, and I have seen many organizations in the room, they are offering what we call relocation support, so that a journalist at risk can get relocation, a journalist at risk can get psychosocial support, a journalist at risk should be able to be supported, not necessarily to live in the camps, because one of the bigger challenges we have is that journalists in exile do not get identity documents. They don't plan to travel. And even when you travel, especially the country like Kenya, then there's a question of registration regime. So those are services that are available. But having said that, I need also to encourage media houses represented here on need to have budgets allocated for the safety of journalists. In the equal measures that we have allocations for equipment that are used to facilitate reporting. And I think it is very important to prioritize the social capital because it's very critical. The other thing I would request is they need to set up, and I think Media Council can help us, build NGOs that are supporting journalists abroad. They need to have, within the Media Council, a government allocation that can help support journalists at risk. Thank you.
Asante DK. Asante sana. DK and Tom Rhodes and DK started the coalition to protect journalists here where we were involved. But in a summary, the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders is very critical in helping journalists in exile. So once you have members, please get his contact and let the conversation continue, even outside the panel. My sister. That person is very critical and very helpful. And plus CPJ, Article 19, there are quite a number of institutions that offer support to journalists in exile. So feel free to get in touch. I know we put together a small document called a one-stop shop for all journalists in exile who come to Kenya and where they can get help. And plus contracts of immigration, the refugee agency, and a number of institutions, plus embassies that help journalists, especially the US Embassy, Norwegian Embassy. Those are very friendly to helping journalists in exile. So having summarized that, I can only give Kennedy Wandera who ninyonga yeye dakika ya kwanza, alafu tuwapigie makofi tuondoke, si ndio? Si nimejaribu. Wandera, can you close for us? We have 3 panels to clear.
Yeah, I think the issues of concern have been raised here, and I think we need to consistently continue doing what Media Council is doing by setting up press hubs. That's one of the biggest things that I can take out of this, because some of these guys come in Kenya to work here, but because they cannot access places where they can work, I think press hubs really come handy. But as we live here, I think this conversation should go beyond Kenya, because we have countries across here who really don't value journalists. There are countries on the continent who really see journalists as demons, for that matter. Last week we had to caution Burkina Faso. These military-led states are a big problem on the continent. They don't want scrutiny, and anybody who tries to scrutinize them, they either suspend you or they put you on the next flight. So I think we need to work more, and every opportunity that we have to continue consistently calling them out, and also ensuring that places where my brother Mugisha works, media councils, be it Rwanda or Kenya, play a bigger role. Thank you.
Mwebale, asanteni sana. Mwebale sebo and nyabo. Let's close it at that level. The other things will give comments on the streets as we move. Asanteni sana. Thank you.
Big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Bwana Victor Bwire, for moderating that session. Naomba tafadhali tusimame. Twaomba mpige picha tafadhali. Naomba mrudivo nyuma kidogo kwenye jukwaa tena. Please, just for the photo there. But for the rest of us, let's be upstanding. Let's just be upstanding as we celebrate them with a clap. Let's go. Come on. That's it. Thank you. We celebrate you. Asante sana. You may kindly take your seats. Well done. Thank you so much. Third panel discussion. You may kindly take your seats. Thank you so much. Third panel discussion. 30 minutes, please. We're ready. Journalism, gender equality, and the environment. The moderator, Judy Kaberia. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All the panelists, please. Dina Ondari, Daniel Agan, Linda Bach, Leon Litigu, Hinda Abdi Mahmoud, Dr. Jacqueline Litugui, Samson Tonoik. Please take your stand. 30 minutes, please. The fourth panel discussion, please be ready. Welcome, 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 welcome. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, questions, comments, menti.com.
Okay, good afternoon. Sorry, we are coming after we had lunch and we are so full, but I think this is also an interesting topic that we have to continue discussing. As we sit in front of you here today, my name is Judy Kaberia, Senior Project Manager, Frederick Naumann Foundation. As we sit here today, we are counting huge losses. Losses of lives. More than 200 lives are lost. Livelihoods have been ruined. Roads have been broken. And the floods are continuing. The downpour is still continuing. And this is just an example of what we are calling the environmental crisis. And when we talk about environmental crisis, we have to acknowledge and appreciate the role that the journalists continue to play. Have we asked ourselves, what is the state of the journalists who are covering this crisis across the country? Can you imagine what they have to deal with as rescuers dig bodies out of mud, out of moving water? So as we think about the storyteller, let us also think about their safety and remember they're not just items or something that is just doing something, but they're also human beings who are affected by this climate crisis. So welcome to our panel of 7. And we have 30 minutes. And so we'll try to go straight to the point. You already had discussions. And so we'll ensure that we go straight to the point because we only have 30 minutes while we planned for 1 hour. So I'll start with giving the story of the journalist, telling it from the newsroom. And so I'll begin with Leon Lidigu, one of the Kenyan journalists who have really been at the forefront to tell the story of environment. Lidigu,
thank you.
You just came back from the field, and we'd like to hear from you. What does it take to tell a story about environment? Because a lot of time, people think environment is just a simple story. It's a feature story. Can you please tell us, what does it take to become a journalist reporting on environment?
Thank you very much. First of all, we are talking about the environment at a time when we have disasters all over the place. Unfortunately, this is the time that we give environment issues a priority to, which is very wrong. As a journalist, I first have to think about the climate story. What is Kenya's climate story? How do I put faces to these stories? As opposed to what many people have been doing in the past. It's not all about the data, the shocking statistics. These are human beings we are dealing with. And we are fortunate enough at Nation Media Group, we have an independent climate desk. And we prioritize science. Science is something that you have to read, extensively read. It's a lot of painstaking work. You have to research. You have to talk to seniors. And fortunate for us, our boss, Mr. Joe Ageyo, has been a science journalist for over 2 decades. So we are blessed that way because it gives us some sort of priority, which is not in the same case with my brothers and sisters in other media houses. And why is this important? When those stories come to the desk, do our editors prioritize them? We need to ask ourselves that. What are the probabilities a story about the climate crisis will be put aside to create space for a story of Raila, I don't know, going somewhere, for example? Those are things we need to talk about. And I need to correct one thing I had from one of the previous speakers. It is not that Kenyans don't like science. I think that is a fallacy that has been going on for a while. If you look at the back end of data on many stories, how stories are consumed in newsrooms, you'll find stories on climate and environment really matter to Kenyans. It is a lot of work and a lot of investment, and unfortunately, not all our media houses prioritize these stories, which is why I think, Judy, if you look at the kind of reporting we are having, considering that science needs time, sometimes it even takes me 6 months, 7 months to put out one featured story. You have to relook at everything. So you find, compared to other media houses that do not have the luxury of having independent desks to just focus on climate, someone has about 5, 6 stories that are all over the place. So how do they get just to focus and prioritize? I think that's a good starting point.
Thank you. That's Leon Lidigu. He's the Global Health and Climate Journalist at the Nation Media Group. And Linda Batch, member of Kenya Editors Guild, also an editor at the Standard Media Group. One of the things that we miss when reporting is the gender angle to environment. A lot of times, our society reflects women as mostly the victims. We forget that men can also be the victims. Also, in responding to the environmental crisis, we also have women who are involved in that. So how do newsrooms ensure gender inclusivity when reporting on environment?
Thank you so much, Judy, for this opportunity. My name is Linda Batch, an editor at Standard Group, and also a council member at the Kenya Editors Guild. The issues of environmental coverage and as well as climate is quite serious. And I would say the way we do it at the Standard, a few years back, we didn't even have a climate desk. But right now, we have one, and we have also a pull-out. And as journalists, as I've been at the Standard for, it's pretty a long time, over 15 years. And our editors, they ensure that they involve women in decision-making. During the editorial meetings, we form part of the teams that, just contribute to the ideas of the day and also giving support to the desk that is there. Doing environmental stories takes a lot of resources. One that comes to mind, I remember the story that was done by Nation Media Group on River of Poison, and I think it took months to do. So the support that we get from the top editors and the support that we also get from the likes of Kenya Editors Guild, where I am, we have a training component, and right now how we are doing it, we insist that we have women as well in the training component. Right now we have an ongoing program with the GIZ, and we've been, apart from just taking journalists blindly, we insist that we include women, we include TV, and we also include digital, print. We include all aspects so that these stories can be given the balance that is required. You find that women in the field, women are in agriculture, women are the ones managing the energy, the energy situations in the households. So we insist that we have a balance. Let's just not have a man doing it from a male perspective, but to include all voices. And when I talk about inclusion, it is just not about the gender aspect, but also marginalized groups, and also we take into consideration people with disability. Yeah, so we try to be as inclusive as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda, for that. Before I go to the duty bearers, I would like to hear from, this is Media for Environment, Science, Health, and Agriculture in Kenya. You'll be representing Daniel Agan. Telling the environment story is not easy, the same as the climate story. It becomes a tired story, and audiences tend to develop fatigue. So as journalists, how do you make the story refreshing to ensure that the subject remains alive?
Thanks, Judy. My name is Riaga John. I'm here representing Agan Daniel, who is our secretary at MESHA. I work for an organization called Medsource Sans Frontiers, or Doctors Without Borders. And very first, I want just to say what Media for Environment, Science, Health, and Agriculture is doing when it comes to the environment crisis. And for us, what we are insisting on is what many people here understand as day two journalism. Because anyone else, if there is floods in Mathare or Maimahiu and people die, any journalist in the newsroom would be sent, and you will all agree with me. They'll say, oh, something is happening, who is available? Let's send so and so. But at MESHA, we come back and say, okay, fine. So we have discussed Mathare, we have discussed these other places. Can we now go down and look at the real issues? So at MESHA, we look at the entire cocktail of issues, and there are many. There are issues to deal with diversity. Right now, you can imagine in an entire village has been swept by floods, and people have to go back, and you are talking about 50 people that you were speaking to yesterday and now are no more. We are speaking about mental illness issues. Are we able to go back and just have a discussion about these things and how they are happening? I know when these things happen, most of the times, when people are sent out there, when we speak about day two journalism, what happens is, if I was a reporter in any newsroom and I say I want to go back and dig the real issues in Mathare, I will be told, no, we don't have a camera, we don't have a car, so that story cannot run. And yet, that is where eyes will be opened, and they will see things in this manner. So how do we do it at MESHA? We have very deliberate things that we call science cafes. So our science cafes then would bring together a group of journalists who are interested in that particular thing. We will bring the scientists together, and we just have a discussion, maybe one morning. And this is critical because at MESHA, we have both journalists and then we have the scientists. A lot of scientists around us have signed up at Measure. So if you are in Measure today, you only need to say, I want to do a story on biodiversity, say in Kwale County, and we will give you someone from within. So you don't have to struggle a lot. And what we are saying, finally, so we have the science cafes, which are very regular. We don't just do them in Nairobi. We also go to Mashinani, because that is where climate change effects are really seen. Number two, we have a publication which is online that is called Science. If you go online today and look at Science, you will see a lot of stories, very good, strong stories, and you ask yourself why they are not on the mainstream. The reason is what I'm speaking about. These journalists that want to go down and look at the issues are not facilitated because of issues that we all understand. There is no transport, hatuna gari, hatuna camera. So within us, we have our own way of funding our journalists. Then they would go down and do some of these stories. And even when they bring the stories, they would still not get space in the dailies. So we publish them on Science, because our mantra, we say, one story told, climate story told, one life saved. So one story spiked or killed at the editor's desk means one life lost.
Thank you very much. We've heard from Leon, from John, from Linda, from inside the newsroom, what it takes to report on environment. We've also heard the kind of challenges that journalists are facing. And even to keep this story alive, just now, it's just a crisis. We're talking about the floods and the heavy downpour. 2 months from now, 1 month from now, a lot of things have been affected. It's an entire ecosystem. It's a crisis within a crisis happening during the doctors' strike, a crisis that is happening when our disaster management itself is in crisis. So as duty bearers, and I'll go to the regulator first, what can we do to ensure that journalists continue finding the untold story, the story behind the crisis, for us to inform the society, to be able to prepare better, or to know how to respond to the crisis? Dina Ondari, not Dina, it's Dina Ondari, Manager, Press Freedom, Safety and Advocacy Media Council of Kenya. Can we hear what is the regulator doing to ensure that journalists reporting on environment continue to work? And one of the things that we've not mentioned, sometimes we see stories on the environment like simple stories. But we've seen you tell a story of environment and you find yourself in crisis, life-threatening crisis, where the people responsible actually want your life. Can we hear from the regulator, how are you able to respond to the safety of journalists reporting on environment, could be poaching, a lot of things that actually affect our environments? Dina.
Thank you, Judy. And of course, as the regulator, we have a responsibility to protect the rights and privileges of journalists. And to us, a threat is a threat, whether it is targeting a political journalist, an environmental journalist, or business journalist. However, it helps to be conscious of what kind of threats environmental journalists or climate change storytellers face. And one of these includes exposure. Exposure can be in terms of health. We have had journalists telling stories about environmental degradation and pollution, and this is likely to cause them to experience exposure to toxic chemicals, pollutants, and all that. The other threat, of course, it's the physical threats. Telling the climate change story, and of course, the climate change story is a story of calling actors to account, and that includes calling governments to account, also calling people, big multinationals to account. We have seen journalists that are bringing us stories about dumping of waste, hazardous waste, which has turned now into a disaster because of the diseases that communities suffer as a result of that. And covering stories like poaching and smuggling, for example, of prohibited animal, be it horns, rhino horns, or elephant tusks, puts journalists in a very risky situation, because these are cartels. They are well connected. They control huge funds, a lot of funds, and therefore a journalist sometimes even finds themselves at the receiving end of communities who feel that they are strangers to the agenda that the journalist is trying to report about. Having said that then, this would expose journalists to issues of even psychosocial problems because they find themselves grappling with matters that not everyone can help them. So having said that, the Council has many interventions that it undertakes to help such journalists, but most importantly perhaps is to mention that we have a climate change reporting curriculum which contains guidelines on how journalists can go about reporting on climate change. And this is one way of creating sensitivity and consciousness around reporting on issues of climate change. And of course, this is strengthened by the fact that this curriculum points or draws from the ethical standards that have been set by the Code of Conduct for the Practice of Journalism. Again, the standards of reporting on climate change do not change when it comes to science or climate. The standards are the standards. So when we have a code of conduct that supports the various curricula that we have, it goes to strengthen the ethical guidelines that exist for journalists to support. And I would go on and on about the interventions that we undertake, and that includes protecting whistleblowers, issuing grants to support climate reporting, undergoing safety training, because sometimes, like now, the simplest example I can give about capacity building is the ongoing floods. And we've been encouraging journalists and sensitizing them that, you know, safety is a personal issue in the first place, because you don't need to put yourself at risk for the sake of a story. There's no story that is worth your life. So we've even seen journalists putting themselves at risk. In the floods, they want to report next to the victim of the flood. You know, the person has already suffered, either it's death or something, and you also want to wade into the same water to report. So it's good to bring out the impact of climate change, to bring out the ruin and the effects, but also please ensure that you protect yourself and do not necessarily put yourself at risk for the sake of a story.
Thank you, Dina. Dr. Jacqueline Lidubwi, she's the project coordinator, Internews Earth Journalism Network for Africa. Recently, you did a report, and it will be very interesting to hear how have you worked with journalists to ensure that the story on environment is well told, in depth, but also ensuring that you do not leave out other angles, and we are not so much into just reactionary, but are actually going beyond the usual story to bring it out in its comprehensiveness. Yes, Jack.
Thank you so much, Judy. So I work for Earth Journalism Network, and Earth Journalism Network is a network of journalists, around 25,000 members, and we have supported almost 16,000 journalists and supported like giving grants to 15,000 journalists to be able to document stories on environment. So anyone here who's been trained by Internews Earth Journalism Network? Yes, I can see hands because I don't know where you can go and there's no one that has been trained by Internews. So what we do, we offer solutions. It has been, during the day, people have been saying journalists need training, capacity building. At Internews, that's what we do. We offer training, we give grants to journalists so that they can be able to cover the stories that are underreported in our country. So recently, we embarked on doing a very ambitious research dubbed Covering the Planet. Covering the Planet is being done by Deakin University in Australia, but featuring almost 818 journalists in Africa, in America, in Latin America, in all over the world. And in that report, it will be launched during the World Environment Day, which is June 5th. But some of the things that we found out is one of the challenge which has not been spoken about. This is how journalists report environment and climate stories. Balance. We know balance is one of the tenets of journalism. But when we are talking about environment and climate stories, we cannot talk about balance. Because when you talk about balance, you bring in climate deniers or people who are skeptical about climate and environment reporting. And when they talk about their views, we bring about what we call climate delayism, and those climate deniers make us not be able to get action. And then we don't have action on climate change. So that is some of the challenges and some of the findings we got from our report. And most journalists in that report said, like 79% said in-person training is what is needed most by journalists. And we find out that even in Kenya, our colleges, do we have environmental journalism? And if we have environment journalism, are we able to break down climate change, carbon trading, carbon offset, all these terminologies that are coming in day in and day out, which makes we are not in a position to be able to tell our stories in an interesting way, in a story that a local person can be able to get. Another thing is funds. We don't have funds, but at Internews we provide funds so that journalists can be able to go to the local communities and tell these stories to the local angle. Because if we don't humanize these stories, if we don't go to the base, to the communities, and they feel represented, we only talk to policymakers and government. The people don't feel that they are part of the story, and that makes us not have a lot of climate action going on. So that's what we do at Internews Journalism Network, and my colleagues are here. I urge every one of us to join Internews at Journalism Network. It is online, but my colleague is here, Kiundu Waweru, Abraham, Marita. Maybe you can just wave after this. You can go and we can give you more information about Earth Journalism Network and what we do and the support that we have given to journalists around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lidubwi. Like you've heard, a lot is being done. Grants are being given. I had the opportunity of chairing the judges panel for this year for the AFTGER Awards. And clearly you can see very few journalists are embracing that kind of environmental reporting that we're talking about. And you've had some of the challenges. There are issues of finances. There are issues of newsrooms not allowing a journalist to sit on one story for 6 months, 1 year, and 2 years. So from NetFund, Samson Sonyok, can you tell us how your organization is supporting the journalists? And based on what you've heard from Leon, from Linda here, right in the newsroom, from Mesha, how can you be able to support the journalists? And the journalists of today don't want a launch of a strategic plan. They don't want to cover a story because we are launching or having a constitution. The journalist of today wants a story from a source, a story that gives them that freshness, that exciting story. Because reporting on environmental reporting is so common. So they're looking for the exclusive story or a story that is really refreshing. So how are you partnering with journalists to ensure that as a source, you're giving that kind of information that they need?
Thank you, Lydia. My name is Samson Tonyok, CEO of National Environment Trust Fund, a state agency under the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change, and Forestry. I'm honored and glad to be here discussing this important discussion, of course, in the midst of a crisis, an environmental crisis, has just been reported by my fellow panelists. We are discussing this topic amidst a flood crisis, and we just from a drought crisis. And I think the role of the media, the role of journalists is very critical. One, as an institution, one of our mandate, of course, is to give awards and appreciating the role of journalists in terms of reporting matters environment and matters environmental management and conservation. We have a category on journalists, specifically to reward or to award journalists that are reporting on environmental issues or related issues. So that is how we partner as journalists. We also recently entered into an MOU with the Media Council of Kenya, just to ensure that, number one, we award journalists. Number two, we also capacity build them. I think there are trending stories, trending issues pertaining environment, issues on climate change. I think there is need for journalists to base their reporting on science, as has been reported. And I think it's important to build their capacity to train them, because we appreciate the role of journalists. And how we can partner in a number of ways, and appreciating the role of journalists. Number one, I think climate change is a human-induced problem. I mean, it is out of our own actions, it is out of our own activities that we have all these crises. We have a flood after a drought, and there is therefore need for reporting on this. There is need for reporting on best environmental practices. I mean, so that we can learn from those environmental practices. We can share knowledge and information on best ways on managing the environment, and also to encourage those that are taking these small actions to ensure that we have a healthy environment. It is also important for the journalist, of course, to report those that are negatively harming the environment. I think that is important. I think there are so many examples in which journalists can do this. I think there are so many actions, or there are few individuals that need to be shamed. For instance, we have issues of logging. We have issues of deforestation. We have issues of sand harvesting, for instance. We have a number of activities, a number of actions that are aggravating the issues of climate change or the issues of environmental management. And this needs to be reported so that these people can be shamed, or these people can be stopped from further degrading the environment. So that is another way, of course, that we can partner with journalists. And in the midst of this crisis, there is what is called climate information or early warning system, which is, I think, is very important for the people at the grassroots or at the front line of fighting climate change. And the only way this information can reach such people is through the media or through the journalists. So we therefore appreciate the role of journalists in the society, the role of circulating information, and the role of informing the vulnerable people in the society. I mean, we've lost over close to 200 people now because of the crisis, and we have from a drought that we lost almost 2.5 billion. So there is need, therefore, for the journalists to report on this, the journalists to create awareness and information on this. And in this way, we are able to build a more resilient society. We are able to reduce on the number of lives lost or the number of properties lost and such kind of things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I hope in your plan, as you want to tell the story, that you're planning to take them to the field and have a plan for that. Like you've had newsrooms that are struggling with the funding and all that. So I hope it's another way of ensuring that we are bringing this freshness that journalists are looking for. So I'll go back to Leon to tell us, from the newsroom, I would like to hear, what will be your recommendation based on your own experience, the time that is required, the amount of resources that are required, the experience that we are talking about, the trauma that journalists are going through with covering of, people dying, and it's an environmental reporting, but a lot of concentration is on telling the story. But what about on the journalists themselves? Yes, Leo.
Thank you very much. Now, as he has correctly put it, we have lost almost 200 lives so far. You can imagine the ladies and gentlemen of the press who have been up day and night digging these bodies. You can imagine, like yesterday I was talking to an expectant mother who was almost swept away by the floods. She had just gone into labor and they were trying to get her to a hospital. These are real human beings who these things are affecting. You can imagine talking to someone and you learn that these are young girls from the northern part of Kenya who have been selling their bodies because of water shortages. These things are happening in this country, and they affect journalists psychologically, emotionally, because they are human beings as well. So there's something also called eco-grief or climate anxiety. We are dealing also with a generation of young people who have never experienced something like El Nino before. So it's tough. For Nation, for example, I will directly go to the HR and get a counselor to talk to. I'm not sure it's the same for my brothers and sisters in other media houses. So my challenge to all those managing newsrooms, do you stop to think about the human beings doing this work? I think it's very important that we do so. Secondly, there's also a big challenge when it comes to reporting of the COPs. Every year you hear COP27, COP28, COP29 this year, which will be held in Baku, Azerbaijan. Now, all my years covering COPs, I always have to look for well-wishers to support me, people who really understand. So when things get back, you can give Jackie a call, you tell her, Jackie, I would love to cover this, but I don't know how to process it. If you talk to my colleagues at KBC and other media houses, for example, they will tell you we would love to be there to tell these stories, but we can't. Science has also to be given priority. That to me would make so much sense because it in turn affects the kind of climate story we tell as a continent and as a country. It affects how we break down science into very palatable bits. My grandmother, for example, does not care about carbon credits. She doesn't. She cares about, she usually tells me when she was a young girl, the river in our village used to reach her neck. Nowadays, it's reaching her feet. She wonders what happens to that river. She's much more concerned about how her cows are going to feed. And these are the human faces we need to put to these stories, and we need your help to do them. Also, accountability. Judy, I can't tell you the number of WhatsApp groups have been kicked out of by government people because of asking accountable questions, including last week. And money keeps disappearing. Even for the African Climate Summit, 3.4 billion disappeared. We have a right to ask where that money went to. When you start asking these questions, you get kicked out of these spaces. And there are accountability questions because Kenyans are concerned to know where their taxes, where all this money is going to. So we need to be bold, be fearless, and do our job. Sometimes we get threats, but what do? It is part of the job. Thank you.
Thank you, Leon. So you've heard environment is also about accountability, the funding, and everything else. So Jackie, what will be your parting shots from Internews based on what you've heard from Leon and the kind of support that journalists want? One of the things that have been asked today is about trauma and support for journalists who are covering, especially this current crisis. And this is just one crisis. A lot more are coming.
Yes, so I've already indicated that everyone, any journalist, aspiring journalist, anyone who is here, kindly join at Internews at Journalism Network. Be our member. We provide resources, we provide funds, we take journalists to the COPs that Lidigu is talking about and to other conferences. But as journalists, because I'm a journalist, what I want to say, let's not shy away from being advocates. We need to be the advocates of the climate and even the environment. Because when we talk about political stories, politicians will come and talk about themselves. And even maybe talk about the businessmen, they will talk about themselves. What about the environment? Will the sea talk about itself? Will the land? Will the trees talk about themselves? So we have to be advocates. We have to talk about our environment because this is what we have. And if we continue bringing climate deniers in our news, in our topics, in our talk shows, we are going to have climate delayism, and there's no action which is going to be taken. So thank you so much for listening, and let's get in touch after this. Thank you.
So, thank you. Riaga, Leon has said, telling the story on environment, especially for the ordinary people to understand, is to report it in a way that they understand. As simple as the river was reaching me here and now it's reaching me here. So, what will be your parting shot, especially for other journalists who are yet to get to that part of breaking down the story and, of course, making an appeal? What kind of support will you require for us to get that story to the ordinary person?
It's very critical to be able to break down a science story to the language that is understood by Leon's grandmother. That is where we must all begin. If you speak about all these things, they'll just be, looking at you and wondering what you're speaking about. So you need to explain to them that sand harvesting, that small thing that you are doing that is degrading the environment has, the net effect is what we are speaking about, this climate change altogether. Last thing I want to say is to appeal to our editors, and I know many of them are here. Listening to Daktari here and MCK, and even in Mesha, there's a lot of training. A lot of people, I would say, are properly skilled. The problem is when they now need to go out and file their stories. Remember, every reporter reports to an editor in the newsroom. So can I be allowed, having been trained by Internews, to go deep into the villages to bring out the science story? I would be told probably, you wait, there is this government function that is happening in this other place. This is the priority, so yours has to wait. And so my beloved editors, you see, the same way I know very soon people will be sending out journalists to go and cover the US elections, fully paid. Give the climate journalists those vehicles, those cameras, and those per diem to go out and bring the science story from Mashinani where they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Riaga. Dina, a month from now, 2 months from now, we're going to deal with another crisis, a crisis of cholera outbreak, a crisis of not being able to move anywhere. And you can see this is as a result of just the one crisis that we are looking at now. So how are you going to support the journalists a month, 2 months from now? Because right now there's a lot of support because it's a crisis. But how do we ensure that there's follow-up of this story? How do we ensure even the story of the doctor's strike? It's happening. I've even asked ourselves, what is happening when we take victims to hospital for treatment when doctors are on strike? So how do we ensure continuity of telling the story beyond the current crisis that we are seeing?
Thank you, Judy. I want to answer your question by way of delving on the issue and the importance of information when it comes to telling the climate story and climate crisis and all that, because I believe that in an environment where we are able to exchange information in a healthy way, we'll be able to solve many of the problems that we are talking about. One of the impacts of information is key in that one of the impacts of denying or making it a challenge for journalists to access information, whether it is through capacity building or whether it is information on climate change, is it leads to self-censorship. When journalists face threats when they're writing the environment story, a journalist will become cautious, obviously, and they will say that, this is a no-go zone. This is not a place I want to go to write a story. And they become afraid of telling the story. A lot of climate information story is packed in technical language, in that, a journalist is not an expert naturally in the environment. They have to go through capacity building. Again, I would urge organizations that the one that Jackie works for and those that work in the climate change to ensure that they break down this information for the journalist first to understand before they expect this journalist to break down the information to Mwananchi. In doing this, you will enable the journalist to verify information, which means that you will protect that journalist from unnecessary attacks that arise from being imbalanced or misreporting or being inaccurate. The journalist, in being capacity built or accessing the right information, will avoid exposing themselves to such risks that we are talking about. Because if you are you want to cover a cholera crisis, for example, first start by sensitizing the journalists. What risks are they likely to encounter even for themselves before they can tell the story? And therefore, I think that information is central in all this discussion that we are having. And as a council, I want to hope, because I'm not the budget holder, to hope that we will continue to give grants to journalists so that they can continue telling the climate story, so that we can facilitate them to go to where the story is, because we believe that journalists are already doing a good job. What they need is support in terms of information and in terms of resources.
Thank you, Dina. Mr. Samson, you've heard. And so from here, what is your takeaway, or what is going to be your action point? Having heard from the journalists the kind of trouble they go through to report on environment and the kind of support that they require.
Thank you, Lydia. I think this has been a very important discussion and gathered a lot that we will take into consideration even as we design our programs to make sure that issues on journalists are mainstream, and making sure that even as we design the projects and the programs, we make sure that the role of journalists or those functions of journalists are taken into consideration so that we are able to capacity build them, we are able to facilitate them in whatever way we can. Thank you.
To you, Linda, to tell the story in its completeness, it means that we have to look at the story from all angles, looking at it from the gender perspective. You've heard the story of Leon, talking about a mother who is expecting a baby stuck in the mud and waiting to be rescued. How do we continue to ensure that we are not missing out on this story, because this crisis brings so many other aspects into the fore? So how do we ensure that the media is able to pick the gender perspective of this environmental reporting that we are discussing?
Thanks, Judy, for that question. I'd like to say that one thing that sometimes in the newsroom happens is we don't stay on a story. There's this habit in the newsrooms that when a story breaks, it's reported, and then we move on to the next news. But I would like to urge fellow editors that let's stay on a story and bring it to its logical conclusion. If a mother has been affected by floods, and you go and cover her, and then you move on to the next, you're not doing justice to your audience, you're not doing justice even to your country. Then put yourself also in stories as an editor. Sometimes you're accused of being insensitive. So put yourself in a story when you're covering a sensitive issue. Assume maybe it's your child, it's your mother. So tell that story with some empathy. Yeah, that's how I look at it. Thank you.
And with that, we come to the end of our panel. I think they've been they've been able to bring out the story. Thank you very much.
Big round of applause once again. Asante sana. Thank you for that engagement. And we have a session, a photo session. But for the rest of us, this is going to be the final engagement. Final engagement. So I'd kindly request that we be upstanding, please. Thank you for being here. And just get yourself a space. I just want to see whether we're ready also for tomorrow. Let's get yourself a space. This is for everybody, if you can do it. Thank you so much. So I don't know whether journalists dance, but we just want to try jumping. If you don't know how to dance, it's okay, but you can just jump. Volume please, volume please. So everybody, okay, let's be upstanding, let's be upstanding. So let's see whether you can jump, but you can dance. Get ready, get ready, get ready, get ready, get ready. Get yourself some space. Okay. So follow the beats, okay? 2, 1, let's go everybody. Jump it up, hey! Fantastic, come on. That's it, that's it, that's it. Oh yeah, man, let's sing it. But hey, fantastic. This one, blow it. I can see Joe and Gail there as well. I love that. Come on, everybody. With the beat. Come on, come on. Joe and Gail, Joe and Gail, Joe and Gail. Come on, come on, come on, Joe and Gail. Makofi yake tafadhali. Come on, come on, come on, come on. I'm going to challenge you. Give us your dancing style. Come on. Yeah, yeah. Okay, what's your dancing style? Dancing style. Yeah, whichever. Okay. Let's go. Everybody. The jumping. I love your dancing. You're jumping. Come on, let's go. Fantastic. Thank you so much. You kindly take your seats. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're closing. 13 minutes past the hour. And Bwana Joe, this is your time. Media sustainability, shaping the future of media in Kenya. Makofi tafadhali, Editor-in-Chief, Nation Media Group, Bwana Joe Ageo. Karibu sana.
Hey, is everyone here? I have a feeling I only have a quarter of my panel, but at least I can see Ellen. Simpige makofi. Ellen Wanjiru, the head of TV content, editorial content at Media Max K24. Did you clap for her or did I hear? Do I have Bernard Momanyi? Editorial Director, Capital FM. Please give him a round of applause as he comes up. We have Mr. Alfred Ambani from CA. Oh, there he is. Thank you very much. He's the Deputy Director, Multimedia Services at the Communications Authority of Kenya. He didn't hear you clap. Please clap until he gets here. All right, do I have Ms. Judy Munyenyi? So we're expecting Judy as well. The Honorable John Kiari, I haven't seen him. Mr. Linus Kaikai, I do know he's on the way. We will probably just take him as he comes. And Diana has something important. Yes, I told you it was very important. The CEO of the Media Council of Kenya is just wrapping up an interview. He's going to be joining us in a short while. And Mr. Kaikai, as I said, is also on the way. So I think that for that reason and many others, I think I'll just move closer to my panel. Please clap for them now that they are the ones who are here. All right, so it feels a little bit odd. I just have a feeling someone is going to sit here. So, Ellen, I'm not running away from you. So I'm going to start this conversation perhaps by just standing up. Yesterday, I was having a conversation with Victor. Victor Bwire is a good friend of mine. And so someone had sent him, he had seen a message actually. So he sent it to me. Someone said, I work for the Nation Media Group. So someone was complaining about a certain story that was behind the paywall, which they felt shouldn't have been behind a paywall. So he forwarded it to me, and I told him, I think everything should actually be behind the paywall because people need to pay for content these days. And then he asked me, but what about public interest? So I asked him, who pays for the public interest? And that is where I would like us to start our conversation today, because the model that has run what we have known as so-called mainstream media for many years has literally collapsed. We know, for example, advertising is collapsing rapidly. Newspaper circulation is on a nosedive, and TV advertising is not what it used to be. And so the question is, yes, there's public interest, but Helen, who actually pays for this public interest? Because at the end of the day, it does cost you quite a lot of money to send somebody to cover the floods, for example.
Thank you, Joe. You know, as journalists, we have to think about our responsibility first and foremost. That yes, we cannot survive without finances. And that's why many media houses are now exploring options to make money. But our primary responsibility is to inform. That our audiences expect us to give them information that is important to them, that they need. So yes, if you have a story that is of public interest, surely you can't expect the public to pay for it. That's why we look for partners in one way or another. And true, traditional advertising has collapsed. There is still some finances that come through advertising, but it's limited. You find that a lot of media houses, I'll give ours for example, we still generate content, but we do a lot of that through partnerships. One of the panelists that has just stepped down, he spoke about financing content generation. They may provide transport, they may provide other necessities in order to take our crews to generate content. So many of our media houses now would look for partnerships of this nature. So I think when you come to public interest, let's not lose sight of the fact that the public looks up to us to provide that information. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I decided to be deliberately provocative in starting this conversation so that we frame what the problem is when we talk about sustainability, because sustainability suggests that the long-term survival of something is threatened. That's when you talk about sustainability. Many years ago, we didn't talk about media sustainability because the business model was secure. There are many media houses that had more money than they knew what to do with. But today, that's not the case. And so I'll come to you, Bernard, because this is what we do for a living. So we are in the place where Ellen is talking about, that the public there looks up to us to give them information that is accurate, that is timely, that is detailed. If they hear something happened on the road, they'll come and they'll tune into Capital FM, for example, to check, is this really true? And when they hear it there, they know, oh, I heard it on this or that place. So where is that balance where, on the one hand, it's becoming more and more difficult to exist because we do our journalism, most of us, in the context of a business. So if that business is not doing well, then journalism is threatened. Where is that balance where you're saying, okay, I have to give these stories because the public needs them, but can I afford?
Thank you, Joe. As we all know, the media or journalism exists for public good. And so everything that we're supposed to do as journalists, we are supposed to do it for the public. But then here comes a catch. We all work, most of us, apart from the state broadcaster, we work in commercial radio stations or TV stations or newspaper or the media generally. And for those of us who are here in the morning, you heard what SG, my friend Odwar, was talking about. Most media houses are struggling to pay their journalists today, either delaying salaries or failing to pay completely. He spoke about painful experiences where correspondents have not been paid for 2 years or so, or several months down the line. And that becomes very difficult for the media. I'm sure all this is not happening deliberately. It is the challenges that has been brought about by the disruption that has set all of us to square one, to start thinking on how else can we do, what else can we do to come up with better alternative business models that can be able to make us survive as the media. And I think this disruption is something good.
We'll just ask Linus to join us straight away. Linus, please just join us live on air. It is fine. We are already on, but it is fine. Just get a seat there. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Linus. Yeah, and so this disruption, I don't want us to look at it as something that we should wish away. I think it is good that it has come, and it is making us to start thinking about alternative business models, because you remember the media for the longest has always relied on advertisements to survive. And that is why we are all crying that there are no advertisements, so the media is dying, the media is closing down. But then there exists opportunities, I believe, that we need to think about outside the box or without the box completely, and be able to come up with these alternatives that can be able to replace these advertisements that makes journalism very complicated, because as they say, he who pays the piper calls for the tune. And so we don't want to keep being tempted to play to the tune of the advertisers. If we get it right in terms of coming up with the right business models, which we are all trying, I'll say almost all the media houses, we are all in deep waters. I believe everybody is trying to do something new, something that can be able to replace that advertising side. That way, we will be able to serve the public better, because like I said, journalism is for the public. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as I give Linus a chance to catch his breath, let me go to Mr. Mbani. This whole thing of sustainability is a very common conversation right now in media circles. You regulate a number of things, the media partly. Is this a conversation at CA, that there's a problem there in the media, a problem of sustainability?
Thank you, Joe. From a regulator's perspective, when we look at sustainability, obviously you are an operator and we are a regulator. We look at different things as a regulator to ensure that the media sector has the necessary resources that we control or we regulate, that will be able to ensure that they offer the services that they are required to. So there are many areas that we look at in terms of when you come to the market. Of course, you have scanned the horizons, and you've seen the opportunities that are there. In fact, one of the things that happens is that part of the licensing requirement is that you must come up with a clear proposition on what is it that uniquely that you're bringing to the market that you think the market is not doing, so that you are able to be sustained. Because sometimes when you flip from, say, for example, radio or television from one channel to another, you're not able to see much difference. So in terms of our regulation, we ensure, one, in terms of spectrum management, because spectrum is a scarce resource, our planning is done in such a way that we ensure that the spectrum is planned efficiently and is utilized for the purpose for which it is required for. So for broadcasting spectrum, we ensure that Kenya has its fair share of the spectrum that will be used by the media for the different services that are rolled out. And this is something that we are doing continuously, because the resources are becoming scarce while the players are increasing. And so we must ensure that the spectrum is efficiently and effectively utilized. And part of the planning is actually to negotiate at the international arena, because spectrum is an international resource. And so it's negotiated at an international level. But part of the purpose that we ensure is to ensure that Kenya has protected its spectrum for broadcasting, because there's a lot of onslaught on the broadcasting spectrum by other services like mobile and other communication services. The second thing is adoption of technologies that would ensure that the players or the media are able to take advantage of, because of the efficiencies and the many advantages. And an example of this is adoption of now the digital technologies. We've already, for television, we did that in terms of the spectrum planning itself. When we look at the issue of sustainability, again, let's look at it from the aspect of the analog that we used to have in television and the digital, in terms of the the expenditure that a media house would have to spend to sustain one channel. You had to run a transmitter, you had to have a tower, you had to have engineers on the hill, on the high sides, and so many other things. You had to pay the spectrum fees because one frequency per channel. But when we adopted the digital technology, it means that the spectrum, the fee is still paid for that one frequency, the same amount, but now we are able to share with 20 media houses or more than 20 media houses in the same space. So in terms of power consumption, in terms of costs that are involved in maintenance of sites, they are drastically reduced because, sorry, Mheshimiwa. Because we...
Karibu sana, Mheshimiwa Kiarie.
Yes. Yeah, because we now have a situation where we are sharing one frequencies amongst 20 media houses or more, and so the costs are being shared and somebody else is maintaining that site, so the costs related to maintenance are shared. When we look at the other areas that
Mr. Mbani, if I just stopped you a little bit, you talked about digital migration and there are all these new players that came, and the evidence that is there really suggests that not that many of them are operating sustainably. A lot of them are really struggling, whether it is because of all the fees they pay to the carriers or just the business environment in the media space. As a regulator, I was on the impression that it would bother you that here you're regulating a space where there are so many dead bodies every day.
Thank you, Joe. In the media sector, this is a sector that is fully liberalized, and as a regulator, we have certain responsibilities. And what you are saying is true. We have seen that, and that is an issue that the regulator is concerned about in terms of the sustainability. We are seeing it. And what my colleague here was actually bringing out, that is the same story that comes out. One of the things is that we cannot continue as media doing the same thing and expect different results. For example, we had the State of the Media report that was launched this morning, and one of the things that was coming out clear is how is media consumed? That is one thing that media houses can take, it's a take home. If the traditional way of consuming media is sitting before a television, which many of us, the older generation, do. You wait for your news at 7 or at 9 to consume, but the younger people are consuming on the go. So we need media houses also to adapt their content to multiple platforms so that their content can be consumed by different, people. Arising from that report, you can see, in fact, I'm sure if you go to the detailed report, you will see different age groups are consuming using different devices and on different platforms. So that's just one of the areas that we can look at. But one of the most important things is that, Joe, what we are saying is that when you look at the market, one of the responsibilities we have is also to ensure that we enhance competition and all that as a regulator. And one of the things of also sorting itself out, because there are mergers and acquisitions, and these are some of that happens all over the world. Regulators adopt all that. So there is no time that the authority will say we are stopping to license because the players are, they are having challenges. The challenges are more to do with how players identify their niche market and how they are able to roll out their services. Okay. Content is one of the other issues.
Okay.
If you have compelling content, you are able to attract your audience. So we must be able to look at what content. This content now, because we have convergence of devices, can we be able to have compelling content which we can be able to adapt to different devices, because people are consuming content on different devices. And so many of these aspects, when we look at them, we will be able to get our niche market, because most of the media houses are not looking for the mass media, they have the niche market. You might find you have an agricultural channel, they are only targeting farmers. You have a different channel targeting different audience. And so by so doing, we are then able to be sustainable, even in a very competitive aspect like this.
Thank you very much. Linus, I let Mr. Ambani speak for a little bit longer so that you get the spirit of the conversation. But the question I think that we started with is where this whole question of sustainability is now seemingly creating a situation where many times there's a good story, but you have to ask whether you can afford it. And the question that is on the table is, how do we navigate that? You have to still tell the public all these important stories, but at the end of the day, you might want to send someone to the US or to Tana River or something, and then you look at the budget and it's just...
Delegates for being late. And Joe, that's a very good question. It is good in the sense that it's broad enough to cover the number of areas where concerns are currently focused on in the media when it comes to the whole question of sustainability. But my wish is capability is a constant question because it's about how does your model survive competition. I get alarmed sometimes that in the media, sustainability has been pushed to look as if we are talking about extinction of the practice of journalism. I don't think the practice of journalism is facing extinction. I think the practice of journalism has actually been getting some endorsements from a number of events because of one thing. In my view, truth doesn't expire. It doesn't have an expiry date. There won't be a time when truth will become something that the society is okay to put behind. Not that trials have not been made, and we are in the era of what we call the alternative truth. Trump, former president of the US, and likely next president, spoke of alternative truths. And that is when you really want to have a self-serving version of things. The reason for which journalism existed in the first place was to always be that middle person that will say, these are the facts, and these are the facts. You can decide whether truth is, but in most cases also the media actually points out where the truth is. So Joe, I don't think media is facing an existential threat in terms of the practice of journalism. But media must be open to the fact that as a business enterprise and as a business model, it's an evolving space. And I like using the analogy of when cars were invented. Horse owners, I mean, how did they feel? I think they went into a conference like this to discuss sustainability, that cars have been manufactured. What do we do with our horses? Lastly, Joe, on sustainability, we shouldn't mistake the evolution of technology for a threat to journalism. Technology is not a threat to journalism, in my view. Technology is a friend of journalism. It's about adapting and becoming agile. And Ambani correctly spoke about the consumption habits. Is the big screen, for example, even in our own home situations, is the big screen that used to be in the sitting room what it used to be maybe 10, 20 years ago, where the family gathers together to watch a particular program? I don't think it is, because consumption habits have changed. The mobile is the king. Everyone goes to their own space and consumes the content as they wish. Ambani spoke about the programming rigidity. If you are rigid, if you have a rigid programming schedule, then yes, that is where the threat is coming. And I don't think we should consider that as a threat to journalism. I think that is a threat to your business model.
There are people in us who would say that the biggest threat to the freedom of the media today is commercial. And therefore, one might even argue that this erosion of the journalistic values is a function of this situation that we are describing, where commercial entities tend to have a bigger say, tend to have a bigger space in newsrooms than they used to have some years ago. I mean, a case in point is where, for example, it is very normal now in newsrooms to find people from sales, advertising, coming around and saying, oh, my client, this has that launch or whatever. Yet many years ago, someone would be surcharged in a newsroom if you put something on air, for example, which appeared remotely similar to an ad. And so that whole dynamic, don't you think there's something fundamental in the sense that that business model has unraveled so fast that actually journalism is in a crisis to the extent that it is being practiced within a business? I mean, if it is journalism on its own, there might not be a problem. I think the question of sustainability, one would argue, comes about because the journalism that we're talking about mainly happens to be enacted within the context of a commercial enterprise.
I think, Joe, I'd place business way down the threats that actually face journalism. In my view, the first threat to journalism is ethical. It's a question of ethics and values. That is the greater threat. Number two, why are businesses coming into the newsroom? It's because they know what journalism has been selling all along, but journalism has been shy to state what is on the shelf. What we really sell in journalism is credibility. We sell a good name. We sell association. And we sell sort of an endorsement of your character, which is why as editorial managers, for example, you'll be asked whether a certain business is okay to advertise in the pages of your newspaper or in your radio or television. So media has been very shy to state what is the real product that they sell. The real product that the media sells is credibility, believability. And all those actually stem from the core values of journalism. Because in the core values of journalism, for example, we are all reminded of basics like accuracy, independence, objectivity, impartiality, verification, things to do with how true is it. So we really proposition our businesses as close as possible to that core that we consider the truth. And that is what we sell. Now, when partners come in, they come in and through the approval of media houses because their name is not a threat to yours and yours is not a threat to theirs. So I see working with businesses as an important aspect because some of these values that we expose in media should actually be also taken to our business partners, those who advertise with us. If you are bringing a product, for example, you're advertising fertilizer, it had better not be soil. It had better be something that the farmer can actually use. It had better be not a fake product because that is what journalism stands for. We try and, as much as possible, to stand for what is right, what is truth, what is true, and what is good for public interest. Joe.
Okay. Mheshimiwa Kiare, you were late, so I will not ask you to say why, but I can harass him. He's my friend for many years. Now, this is the question for you. I mean, we have seen around the world governments, parliaments, basically coming up with legislations to attempt to give media value for what they do. So this is with regard to the big tech companies, for example. If you look at the advertising space, digital advertising space, only about 6%, even in this country, only about 6% go to all of us collectively. The rest of it will go to the people who own the platforms and not the people who create the content. And that is a big debate. There have been legislations passed in Canada, in New Zealand, and all kinds of places. We don't seem to hear a lot of conversation here in the political leadership about the public good that journalism is, and therefore the need to find a way of creating an environment, whether it be legislative or even just administrative, to make sure that media can truly thrive and discharge the functions. In this country, many people think that the government tends to look at the media as the enemy out there.
Thank you very much, Joe. And you don't have to ask why I'm late. I will offer. I was here for the opening ceremony, and it's a very busy day in Parliament today. It's a day that the 13th Parliament was prosecuting the matter of an impeachment of a cabinet secretary, and I had to wait for the afternoon session where I had questions I had to answer, which have to do with this sector. And it is only after this request for statement was tabled on the floor and I put in the response that I was able to rush back and be here on time. And let me start by first saying, what an amazing panel. Joe, you say we come a long way back. You can look at the panel and see, if I was still in the newsroom, I'm sitting in a panel with my bosses. So I would not be late for no good reason. I actually just was attending to duty, and when time allowed, I am here. Well,
your apology is accepted.
Thank you very much, Joe. And great question you ask. How fast is the Kenya Parliament legislating over matters that are beneficial to the welfare of journalists and as such growing the sector? And I've got to say that a lot is happening, especially now. The committee that I'm chairing in Parliament is only serving its second term in the life of a Parliament that has been around from the age of the LegCo in the 50s. Then in 1963, we had the Kenya Parliament, which has served for over 60 years. This is only the second term that we have a committee on communication, information, and innovation. It tells you how seriously or not this country has been taking some of these issues. Before the last Parliament, the committee which I'm chairing was just a small component of a bigger committee. In fact, I think it was a part of the Energy Committee. So I was honored to, in the last term, sit in the first cohort of the Committee on Communication, Information, and Innovation. And finally, some of these issues are now being taken a bit more seriously in this country. Are laws being passed? Yes, there are laws being passed. In the last Parliament, our committee was able to process and pass quite a number of laws that are very beneficial to the sector, and even more specifically to journalism. As we speak today, and I did say that in the morning, our committee is just about to process a report that is coming from a task force that was put in place by the Cabinet Secretary for ICT and the Digital Economy, which is seeking to have a look at the entire lay of the land in the communication space, all the policies, the regulations, the legislation, with a view of doing one of three things. There are laws that might need to be repealed altogether. There are laws that will need amendments, and there are laws that will need to just be brought on board, fully new laws that will need to be onboarded. And this is actually meaning a total overhaul of the entire policy, legislative, and regulation landscape for the first time in 25 years. If you look at the Mother Act that superintends over this space, the Kenya Information and Communication Act, it's around maybe quarter of a century old. If we are talking the turn of the millennium, I think that's when KICA came into place. I remember I was a university student. Previously, in this whole sector was under the purview of the Kenya Post and Telecommunication Corporation, if you remember. It was the KICA Act of 1998-99 there that was able to even split KPTC into what we have today. Regulators like CA, we have the Media Council, we have Posta, Telco, even the Telcom, and even the telcos yourself is speaking about what benefits the strongest animal, not the fastest, not the swiftest that survives. It's actually the animal that adapts best that survives. So in the lay of the land today, in the point of view that I found Linus talking about, is it true that media today are still the truth peddlers that they were yesterday? It's a question for us to ask ourselves. We also need to ask ourselves the question, How is this unholy trinity of business, politics, and media playing out to the unsustainability of media in Kenya? Remember, media has such a pole position in narrative formation in a country that media also has to take a portion of the blame for where we are as a country in terms of development. There is a reason why they are called the fourth estate. There is a judiciary, there is the executive, there is parliament, not estate. Meaning that if we look at Kenya today and say that this is where we have gotten as development, media ought to take its share of the praise and its share of the blame in equal measure as to where we are. I make this point knowing that Kenya is a country, for example, that has some of the finest. But who are the superstars in Kenya? Superstars in Kenya. Who make the headline? Who are in our opinion columns? Who are even making it to even our human interest stories? Instead of running a human interest story, we are learning the human interest stories from the perspective of the politician. So today, our superstars in this country are not musicians. They're not footballers, they're not athletes. Media has helped us build our politicians into the superstars that they have become. And dangerously so. Because today in Kenya, the politician is not only the superstar, he is seen to be the most knowledgeable character in anything and everything that is out there. So where does that leave professionalism in other technical spaces? We do not have the space for the engineer. We do not have the space for the doctor. We do not have the space for the athlete because the media has ceded so much space to the politicos that today the conversation that we call media is all around the political happenings of this country. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. And that includes the fact that the politicians are paid better than the teachers and the doctors. But we'll have that conversation if we had another several hours. But right now we have very little time. And Bwana Moyo amefika. So we'll give you most likely will actually have the last word because you're almost here. But I was wondering from MCK, the whole conversation of sustainability. I mean, you framed this conversation that we are having now. What is sustainability from your end of things and as the body that, the norm setting and the norm enforcing body in this space, what is your take of sustainability?
Thank you. I would like to give it three broad looks. That of course, we know that good journalism is very expensive. Someone must pay for that. Earlier this morning, I said that we had exactly 11 years ago, we had 9 TVs and 33 radio stations. That was slightly less than 50. Today, we have more than 500 of those alone. That means that the cake has, or rather the children eating the cake have increased more than 10 times. We are not sure if the cake itself has increased that much. And if you look at figures, you show that the advertising spend has been going up, but I think it looks like the guys biting the cake are more than that. We need to think about that so that we realize that the same advertisers, while they are more than 500 now, there is an emerging trend of advertisers who are the content creators, who are being paid directly for running something, getting enough followers on X, Facebook, and all that. They're being paid directly. So while initially the cake was restricted to 50 children, now it's not restricted to the 500 or so media houses alone. It's about 500 or so media houses, and there are about maybe 2, and very soon will be about 5,000 individual content creators who still eat that advertising cake, and that has been a major disruption. But going back, because really the role of government, and I'm happy that the chair is here, is really a clear policy framework. We must have also collaboration from the media sector. Big tech is taking a very big chunk of the advertising budget. But anytime we want to come together and work as an industry, big tech also will make sure that they isolate NMG alone and discuss with them a partnership, and then they take somebody alone and all that. Therefore, we are not able to come as a country like I've seen what Germany, Australia, and Canada have done, demanding a certain percentage of all advertising on those platforms comes back. So then the work will be get a clear, transparent framework that all the money going out, a certain percentage levy comes to a fund that can be transparently managed. But that can only work if then we refuse to negotiate in little corners with big tech, because big tech knows that if all the principal media outlets agree with the legislators that we are here, that we want this percentage availed in this fund that goes to support media, then we will be able to move. So we have the challenge of the number of mouths to fill, and now suddenly that individuals are practicing journalism, and the person who pays for that, who was a traditional advertiser, is moving in. The traditional, the funders, or that we call the partnership agencies and all that, are not as many. Nobody has enough money to sustain 600 media houses at the moment. That is a challenge. And so, and if you, as you push the state, they have a duty. I think principally we need to see the state and is a transparent legal policy and regulatory framework, less and less about sustainability, because we all know that the state runs its own media houses, and we know that the discussion of sustainability is perhaps louder in those media houses than in the private media houses. So if you come from out, it's like if we have private universities saying we want support from government to sustain universities and all that, but government has its own bunch of universities that is discussing around that. So if we quickly change the narrative into demanding a transparent, predictable policy and regulatory framework to enable us to operate in a clear environment, it's much better than asking a state to allocate money for our sustainability. We are that many. Even how to share these among 600 media outlets is complex in itself, and this is a state that is trying to find out how to do that. So I think if we move towards that and agree, the scoop mentality in media houses is really separate, that we do not even know when it's a common industry matter to move together and discuss for policy. We tend to outcompete each other even on a matter which is of a common general interest. If we align our interests around those, then we'll be able to have longer discussions around this. Allow me to state 2 dates that are important for us. On the 10th March 2020 is when Kenya declared the first case of COVID. From then, media houses which were struggling, which had not paid salaries, which had not paid their CA subscription and all that, started firing people in the name of COVID and all that. We got people's salaries cut and all that. The challenge used to be there. Then come to March 7, this year, when we had a policy shift about advertising KBC and all that. People who had not paid salaries for more than a year now saying government advertising has left and all that. But what was the state before March 7? What was our state before March 13, 2020? Those are, because that escapist mentality then makes us really fail to face the elephant in the room and realize maybe the numbers don't make sense, maybe our policy and regulatory framework is unpredictable and too loose, and therefore we do all that shadow boxing. I am not saying that government should make any decision in any nature, but we were putting too much energy, perhaps chasing, somebody says we are chasing the fox, and there are many antelopes in the forest. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much. Actually, would you believe it? The time is over, and I have a broadcast background, so time is everything. So I'm being shown I have only a few seconds. So I would like to thank my panel here. We have had a great discussion here. Not even half of what we would have discussed, but I want to thank you very much. The Honorable John Kerry, Mr. Ambani, Deputy Director, Multimedia Services at the CA, Bernard Momanya, Editorial Director, Capital FM, Ellen Wanjiru, Media Max, she's the Head of TV Editorial Content, Linus Kaikai, Editorial Director, RMS, and of course, our host, David Omoyo Moyo, CEO, Media Council of Kenya. Thank you very much. My name is Ageo Joe, and this conversation needs to continue in all our spaces, and let's remember the key points from each of our panelists. Thank you very much. I am 4 seconds over.
Thank you so much. A big round of applause to the dear panelists. Thank you so much for the engagement. We'll have a final photo there. Let's have a final photo there. And I'd kindly request for the final time, let's just be upstanding and give them a round of applause. This is the last installment. Makofi tafadhali. Thank you so much. Wow. We are now closing, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for your patience, your attention, your sacrifice. Asanteni sana. Mwaweza kuketi kwa sasa, asanteni sana. Naam, sasa kutufungia, mgeni wetu wa heshima amefika, na katika hali ya kutuongoza kufunga, ladies and gentlemen, we're closing now. It's exactly 2 minutes past 5. Please, to now welcome our chief guest to close for us. Tumkaribisheni tena, amekuwa hapo mbele yetu, Bwana David Omoyo. Makofi yake tafadhali. Chief Executive Officer, Media Council of Kenya. Welcome. Karibu sana, karibu sana. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
It has been a long and fruitful day. I am not chief guest, but MC. I'm only the host. And I have a simple duty to invite, on behalf of the Chief Justice of Kenya, Justice Gatembu Cairo from the Court of Appeal, to give us the closing remarks as sent by the Honorable Chief Justice. Karibu sana. Makofi kwake jamani, hata kama tukuchoka.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Chief Executive, Mr. Mbwayo. My task is to read the speech on behalf of the Honorable, the Chief Justice, who could not, unfortunately, be with you on account of other engagements. So I will go on and just read the speech without more. So these are the Honorable Chief Justice's closing remarks for the annual Media Summit and commemoration of World Press Freedom, Day 2, 2nd of May, 2024, Safari Park. The theme, A Press for the Planet, Journalism in the Face of the Environmental Crisis. I am honored to join you today as you conclude the celebration of World Press Freedom Day and the annual Media Summit. Let me start by commending the Media Council for the unwavering dedication to the spirit of excellence in journalism, as evidenced by the hosting of the 12th Annual Journalism Excellence Awards. Such initiatives not only recognize the pivotal role of journalists, but also encourage a continued commitment to truth and integrity in reporting. In addition, they also serve to elevate the discourse around significant societal issues and encourage a well-informed citizenry. This year's theme, A Press for the Planet, Journalism in the Face of the Environmental Crisis, could not be more timely or significant. It is essential for us to acknowledge the unique position held by the media in shaping public understanding and action towards environmental conservation. the Constitution of Kenya 2010 is fundamentally an ecological document. It implores each one of us, irrespective of our professions, to embody and advance the principles of transformative environmental constitutionalism. This entails a proactive engagement with the challenges posed by the triple planetary crisis, consisting of climate change, biodiversity, loss, and environmental pollution. Journalists have a unique privilege and responsibility. You serve as the custodians of information and as essential links between policymakers and the public, playing a critical role in educating and influencing both spheres. Therefore, I call on the media to effectively bridge the gap between complex scientific data and public comprehension, helping to mobilize community support for environmental conservation. Ladies and gentlemen, true excellence in journalism involves not just reporting facts, but also delivering courageous stories that challenge prevailing norms and promote accountability. In this respect, investigative journalism is crucial as it exposes the root causes of environmental challenges and highlights both failures and potential solutions. In facing an unprecedented environmental crisis, the media must be a vital ally in promoting sustainability. Your reporting should clarify complex issues, making them accessible to all, thus empowering citizens to make informed choices and demand action from leaders. The reality of climate change, driven by human activities like excessive greenhouse gas emissions and extensive land use changes, is undeniable. The media's role in educating the public about the immediate impacts of these changes is more important than ever. It's essential for journalism to move beyond just reacting to environmental disasters. A proactive, thematic reporting approach that focuses on prevention, mitigation, and adaptation strategies is crucial. Journalists should strive to make the scientific aspects of climate change understandable and actionable, enhancing public engagement and encouraging collective action and policy influence. Moreover, providing timely, accurate weather information is vital, especially for farmers making critical agricultural decisions. Journalists should work closely with meteorological experts to translate this data into actionable advice. However, challenges like the complexity of scientific terms often lead to public misunderstanding and disinterest. It is crucial for journalists to simplify this information to keep the public engaged and motivated to push for comprehensive environmental policies. As we leverage the influence of the press in our pursuit of environmental stewardship, it's imperative to cultivate a media landscape that is proactive and committed to its role as both watchdog and educator. This approach is essential for nurturing informed public discussions and sparking policy and community actions aligned with sustainable development goals. Ladies and gentlemen, as members of the press and stewards of information, your role is indispensable in crafting a sustainable future for Kenya. By prioritizing environmental issues in your reporting, you help shape a national consciousness that values and actively engages in the preservation of our planet for future generations. Let us all aspire to this high standard of responsibility and purpose. As we commemorate World Press Freedom Day, let us also remember the challenges many journalists face: censorship, political pressure, and at times, threats to personal safety. It is our collective duty to defend the freedom of the press because a free press contributes to a strong and resilient democracy. In conclusion, let this summit be a reminder of the power of responsible journalism and the role it must play in safeguarding our planet for future generations. I urge you all to continue your commendable work with integrity and courage, knowing that you do not just report events, you catalyze change. With those remarks, it is now my honor and privilege to declare the 2024 Annual Media Summit and commemoration of the World Press Freedom Day officially closed. Thank you, and God bless you all. The Honorable Justice Martha Koome, Chief Justice and President of the Supreme Court. Thank you very much.
Wow, let's all be upstanding. Thank you so much. Honorable Justice Gatembu Kairu, Judge, Court of Appeal. Asanteni sana kwa kuja. Ladies and gentlemen, a quick one as we close. Tomorrow we start at 6 p.m. We've been invited to the annual Journalism Excellence Awards. We start at 6 p.m. We end at 8 p.m. God willing. Remember, it's Ankara style, so come dressed African Ankara style. I'd kindly request that we end the way we started. Let's remain standing for the Kenya National Anthem. Indeed, we're standing on the shoulders of great men and women. Asanteni sana, tupatane kesho majaliwa saa 12 jioni. Asante sana. Hadi saa 2 usiku. Kila la kheri, Mwenyezi Mungu na awabariki na awahifadhi.